Welcome to the Journos. I'm Peter Martin, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Andy Devlin of the Sun newspaper and our very own Alison McConnell to talk all things football, domestically and slightly further afield as well. And lots of hot topics today to get our teeth into, although one of them is the most complex topic I think we've ever done on the Journos since we started this. But of course, politics and sport inextricably linked as the Green Brigade come out fighting against Celtic. Rangers are edging closer to a new manager. Hampden ready to play its part in the Euros in 2028. The SPFL set for a new ticket allocation rule, has to be voted on, and we get to name our top 5 sports documentaries of all time. So I've kind of broadened it so that we can look towards other sports as well. What's your top 5? Put it in the comment section below. And don't forget, if you hit the subscribe button, you can join the football family on our YouTube channel, and also if you download the app, all the breaking news at your disposal. So let's get into the meat and bones of, quite simply, the Green Brigades. Celtic themselves, on the basis of a banner which was raised by the Green Brigade, have come out with a statement condemning what the Green Brigades have done. Banners displayed in a section of Celtic Park prior to Saturday's game do not represent the views of Celtic Football Club, and we disassociate ourselves from them. We condemn the display of such messages at Celtic Park. Celtic is a football club and not a political organisation. One of our core values from inception is to be open to all, regardless of race, colour, politics or creed. So basically, off the back of that, the Green Brigade said they would like to reiterate our unshakable belief that we and other football supporters have the right to express political views on the terraces, just as ordinary citizens do elsewhere in society. Football remains one of the few areas of public life where working class people have genuine political agency, and we will not be dictated to by an elitist board that has repeatedly demonstrated contempt for the history and traditions of Celtic Football Club. Now, there are longer statements on behalf of Celtic and the Green Brigade, and I'm not in any way trying to diminish their right and what the points they're putting across. What I would say, to set the agenda here, guys, is it's a thoroughly complex situation that's happening at the moment between Israel and Palestine, and of course the acts of, in some cases, terrorism, and some people will argue that it's not terrorism. That's not for us to judge. I think what we're trying to come to terms with is there a legitimacy in being able to use football as a platform to put out a political message?
I think for time immemorial, football doesn't exist in a vacuum. Sport doesn't exist in a vacuum. I think politics and sport are heavily intertwined. I think it's impossible to extricate yourself from that. I think historically and currently, I think that's always been the case. And I think Celtic as a club and as a support, I think, has always been heavily involved in politics for as long as I can remember. You go back to the miners' strikes and supporting the miners and anti-Thatcher all throughout the 80s. And I think it's just it's a microcosm of society, of an element of society. And I don't think you can ever remove politics from it. I think for some people it makes them uncomfortable. Some people wish to go and watch football, and that's what they're there for. For others, it is a social vehicle to exercise a political point. I don't think you can argue the rights or wrongs of it. It just exists. It just is. It's a fundamental aspect of life and of society. But I think the issue on Saturday, I think there were 2 issues on Saturday. I think the timing of the banner when Hamas had launched this terrorist attack, and it is a terrorist attack, I think the timing of it would suggest that there was a sympathy with that attack, and I think that was a huge problem. And I also think the wording of the banner also suggested a support from Hamas, and I think the danger with that is that you conflate 2 different things. You conflate a support for Palestine with a support from Hamas, and I think you have to differentiate between those 2 things. I think Celtic fans have long held an association and a sympathy with Palestine. I think that's very, very different for support for a terrorist organisation, and I think you have to be careful to separate both of those.
Well, the ultimate issue here for me, Andy, is, of course, you can argue, the division of, as Alison has mentioned, separating Palestine, Hamas, and on many occasions before, the rights and wrongs of backing Ukraine against Russia, and showing solidarity for Russia's invasion. Some Palestinian people would argue, if you go back all the way to, the inception of the Balfour letter, which basically started the migration of Jewish people to Palestine. You can argue all of that. Our main point here of debate is basically, if it breaks rules, you take the fine. That is it in a nutshell. If you want to legitimately say we have a democratic right to put up banners, and there is a rule which says if you do that, then the club will be fined, then that's just the issue. And then the club has a dilemma which says, if we're constantly getting fined, do we ban you, or do we just consistently let you do that on a regular basis?
I think that is the major headache, if you like, for the club, and I think that's why the statement was pretty strongly worded the other day in regards to it. As Alison rightly says, the timing really poor. I think you look at the reaction on social media, the vast majority of supporters want to come along and support their team, cheer their team on a Saturday afternoon. There's obviously a faction at Celtic that want to make their views known, but as you rightly say, Peter, it's the club that will carry the can for this, because there will be a fine. I know in the past that the Green Brigade have mobilised and paid their own fines in the past, but the club at some point is going to have to, it's all going to have to come to a head, and where they have to say, right, is this now becoming so much of a distraction off the field that it's going to impact what we are trying to achieve as well? I think this will come to a head pretty quickly, I really do.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to an undercurrent. Just now, I think the last few days identifies an undercurrent that has been there. There's almost a civil war here at Celtic, not just between the board and the Green Brigade, but I think between a wider Celtic support and a smaller element of the Celtic support. I think a lot of people have been exasperated with some of the behaviours that you've seen. I think some of it's embarrassing. I think sometimes I would reference the song sung about Jimmy Bell, the song sung about Davy Cooper. I think the vast majority of fans would find them abhorrent. I think there wouldn't be a groundswell of support for that. And I think you have a real separatist element just now of the Celtic support that is at odds with the wider community, and I think I would again stress that I think support for Palestine and support for Hamas are two very different entities. I think you have to be very careful about that. And on one hand there, you can understand people feeling that there is a hypocrisy within the football community in a wider element, because we would all not have batted an eyelid at raising flags for Ukraine. None of us would have spoken out about that. So if you see that the Ukrainian situation was very similar to a Palestinian situation, then you would say, well, why can you offer support for one and not the other? I could completely sympathise with that argument. However, I do think there are wider aspects just now within the Celtic support that speak to a real chasm between two separate factions.
Yeah, and we're not in any way new to fans and sports people using the platform of the sport that they play in to actually voice their displeasure at certain things in society and life. I'll have to look at Colin Kaepernick. He started the whole take the knee. His career suffered as a consequence of that.
Absolutely, and there is good to be had from it. You look at Marcus Rashford most recently. He used his platform, took on the government with regards to school meals for children. So there are positives to be gained from this kind of thing. As I say, I agree with Alice. I just think the timing on the back of the terrorist attacks at the weekend has given the club a real issue, and they are going to have to deal with it before a heavy fine comes their way, because, as you're right, Peter, that's what will happen.
Yeah.
I think as well, like the vast majority, there's no one in their right mind can support what happened at the weekend. You can be hugely sympathetic to a Palestinian cause, as many people would be, but you cannot on any level endorse or what happened, an attack at a music festival, people turning up to go and have a day out. It's a targeted attack on civilians, and I think of course, the great irony is, of course, that if you're very sympathetic to a Palestinian people who have felt persecuted for so long, then you cannot possibly justify an attack on other people that's utterly senseless. You just cannot. And then, of course, the retribution that comes, it's ordinary Palestinian people that bear the brunt of it. Gaza, I think, is half of the population is children. When you listen to the rhetoric of the last few days, you hear the language that has been used, and then you see the retribution is harrowing. It's impossible to watch, I think. I think
it's very difficult to watch, but the one thing I would say, and this is where I think, we tread on ice, but I don't think we should shirk these topics because they become, at the forefront of people's mind. This one is a red hot topic. But again, the legitimacy of one group of people and their fight is not what we're debating. And I think that's the great thing that Andy's talking about there, with the club has to make a call on it, on what they do with the Green Brigade. The legitimacy of people being able to show banners down throughout history. I did mention the word, it's inextricably linked. People make stances, they show their support for whether it's a country, whether it's the politics, whether it's an individual. I'm thinking back to Muhammad Ali, didn't want to go to the Vietnam War, and people showed their support for him. The biggest problem here is we don't need to work out or debate whether it's okay to actually put forward an opinion. For example, the solidarity with Ukraine. Everybody was flying the Ukrainian flag. There was a lot of people showing their support. Was there that groundswell of opinion against anybody showing their support for Ukraine? We don't need to determine the legitimacy of that. I think the main focus of our attention with this situation is, you can say till the sun don't shine, we legitimately want to express our opinion and use football as a platform. But if there is a rule in place in sport, the Olympic Games, football, the World Cup, UEFA tournament, if there is a rule in place which says if you put any banner up which has political connotations, or indeed could be deemed as favouring someone and taking a political stance, or an individual that could be found to be offensive to another party, if there is a rule in place and that rule is broken, the club will be fined. Now, the second part of that, for I think for everybody here in the home base, is it quite clearly could bring a fine to the club. The second debate is, what is the club going to do with that element of the Green Brigade? The Green Brigade could say, well, if we get the fine, we'll hand the money over because we'll all raise the money for it and give it to the club, but we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I understand. I think, again, you would have to say, if you raise a Palestinian flag, that's very, very different for some support for Hamas. I think you could argue, if you want to raise a Palestinian flag, I think you're probably entirely legitimate to do so.
Yeah.
However, I take your point, it invites a fine. That's a whole different argument. You could have a conversation about whether UEFA, the hypocrisy of UEFA in there too, when, politics. Next month we'll have poppies in football. Politics and football is very much a political vehicle. It always will be. But I think in terms of the issue with the Green Brigade, I think it's a massive problem for Celtic, not just on this one incident, which has been one of many, but it is a community in its own right. I think it's almost become impossible to police for the club.
And the only one thing I think is it a level of hypocrisy? You can't have your cake and eat it, and go through a long period of time, Andy, where the Green Brigade were allowed to put up banners, sing songs with the IRA. There is a battle with that some people say, well, you're taking a strong stance here, why don't you take a strong stance on that, regardless of whether the Green Brigade thinks it's a historical association with Ireland in their history. That stance is a slight bit of hypocrisy.
I mean, as Alison says, they have become almost impossible to contain and to self-police. Initially great for the atmosphere and brought vibrancy to Celtic Park. but it has kind of manifested itself into something completely different. I agree with Alison. There's a real hardcore element among the Green Brigade that probably see themselves above the law in that regard, in many regards. And this is where the issue is for Celtic. How do they get that back under some kind of control? Because at the moment, this will only fuel, Celtic responding to or putting statements out again, and anti-Green Brigade statements. This will only fuel their hunger and their desire and their drive to make their voices heard and make their voices even louder. So it's a real problem for Celtic. On the one hand, they want to keep them there and internally lend themselves to the atmosphere at Celtic Park on match nights, especially European nights. The players and the manager always make a point of going to the Green Brigade at the end of every game, but they have to get it under some kind of control. I
know there was an AGM a couple of years ago where Ian Bankier spoke about the singing, and it was addressed when they tried to condemn the growth of IRA chants. I think for a long time you'd heard at away Celtic games, you'd heard among the travelling sport. I think of late it started to creep into Celtic Park. It was far more vocal at Celtic Park. I think that is an entirely new issue. I don't think you had that. You obviously all started with Fergus McCann and that Boys Against Bigotry movement, but I think for a long time it was very much a smaller problem that you felt it went hand in hand with an away support. There's been a greater prevalence of that at Celtic Park, and I think the club have tried to address it. I know Ian Bankier spoke about it, and he spoke about songs that shamed the support as a whole. I think it's almost impossible for them to police it without coming out and saying we're closing this section down and we're splitting everyone up. I'm not sure what else you do.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, although I would say on the two counts here that we are debating, I don't think anyone is debating the fact that it's a terrible situation in Israel, between Israel, the Gaza Strip, Palestinians, terrorist activity and people losing their lives. I think everybody right across the board, not only here in Scotland but right across the world, is absolutely aghast at some of the pictures that are coming through, and nobody wants to see life lost. And certainly in both counts I think there's a real desire to try and find a solution. As far as being a sports programme and a journalist debating it, our debate is not on the legitimacy of someone putting up the banner. It's basically, is it breaking a rule? If that rule comes into play, is there a fine? And then after that, if it is a persistent situation, which it has been with the Green Brigade, is there a call for Celtic Football Club to take action to disband that area and split up the fans so that there is not a situation where they're allowed to en masse display these banners. So it'll rage on. I'm sure the Green Brigade will continue their fight and Celtic Football Club have a decision to make, and I think that's the clear issue. Trying to debate the legitimacies of Palestine, terrorists and Israel is for other platforms and news platforms which even the best of minds are finding it very difficult to work out that solution. There's another solution which I think is increasingly difficult to work out in sport, is who's the right man for the Rangers job. I never thought that would be a link from one topic to the next, but stick with me on it. But quite simply, the great thing about a Rangers manager, and over the 20 to 30 years that I've worked in the game, I've worked with so many fantastic journalists who fire out a story, and if it comes through, we told you first, and you've used that headline on many an occasion. But my sources tell me they're veering more towards Clement with a 4-year deal. But listen, these things can switch at the last minute, Andy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we're on safe ground to say it's pretty much a two-horse race now with regards to Philippe Clement and Kevin Muscat. It's probably gone on longer than I thought it would.
Why?
I think purely because the board can't decide. I think there's a split in the board, a definite split on the board as to who they want. You're saying Clement. I think Kevin Muscat maybe just slight favourite at the moment. I think he's got a bigger sway in the boardroom, but that is the major issue. The directors, chairman, chief execs, etc., they can't nail this down. They can't make a decision. The issue for them is they have to get this right, Peter. They have to get it right. I have to say, I thought after Pedro Caixinha, lessons might have been learned in that regard. People at the time said Steven Gerrard was a gamble. I suppose any managerial appointment is. I just thought he would bring a bit of gravitas to the role. You look at his trophy record, but he also delivered, the title that Rangers fans craved the most. Michael Beale was a baffling appointment from the get-go, as far as I was concerned. I think it was the easy option. When Steven Gerrard left, I think Van Bronckhorst was an obvious candidate. Michael Beale was then the easy option for Rangers. At that point, they had to find resources from somewhere to back an experienced manager. To then allow Michael Beale the leeway he had in the summer with regards to recruitment, baffling. It really is baffling. And this summer alone, the summer past alone, could set Rangers back for a couple of seasons, Peter, because as we touched on before the show, the Cyril Dessers of this world, the Sam Lammers of this world, Abdel Assima was on loan. Everybody else, it was 3 and 4 year deals that were handed out in the summer. Now, if you look at the recruitment, Michael Beale signed 11 players in total. You would give Todd Cantwell and Nico Raskin pass marks for what they did after arriving in January.
Yeah, Butland.
And I was going to say in the summer, Jack Butland, for me, is the only one that's been worthy of praise. I get that Sima has pitched in with some important goals. By and large, is he an improvement on what Ryan Kent was delivering? I'm not so sure. So you have a situation where you could have the new manager, whoever it may be, coming in and inheriting this squad of players who are so far off the mark, I should say. It's staggering. It really is. They are a significant downgrade on what was there previously, and that is a damning indictment on the recruitment policy. And with Ross Wilson leaving, I'm quite sure that a lot of these guys were kind of singled out and targeted. But the buck stops with Michael Beale. Some of these players Michael Beale had scouted 3 or 4 years ago. Now, with the best will in the world, Peter, you know yourself, you're not old Hugh McDonald that works in your show isn't the same. He's not giving you the same levels he did 3 or 4 years ago, I'm quite sure.
I'll relay that. The question is commitment. He's been not bad in a couple of games, I have to tell you. But on that point, and I think Andy makes a great point here, and it's the organisation's biggest call coming up for a manager. Not for me the biggest decision. The biggest decision is, how do I fund this manager? Because if you're inheriting a group of players that couldn't beat basically Limassol, I mean, it was an embarrassment. But if you are inheriting that group, you have to try and get something out of them. He has to be given the chance to get funds. Now, here's the big dilemma. I say they're leaning towards Clement. Andy says Muscat. The attraction of Muscat might be that they think, well, he might be able to get some of that market over in Asia, which can come over and replicate what Ange Postecoglou has done. The negative for Clement is he's looking at maybe the European market, Belgian, French, Dutch, and players that he knows that might cost money. So the big call for me is not only the manager, it's how to fund the manager, and I don't know where they're going to get that money, Ali.
I would agree with you, and I think talk of 3 and 4 year contracts for managers is madness. I think a 1 year rolling contract seems, for me, would be absolutely the sensible way to go. I don't know, sometimes if maybe you need to attract a manager by offering a longer term contract, but I think that's madness for one. I think we spoke about it at the start of the season that this was very much Michael Beale's team because of the sheer volume of players that come in between January and then across a very busy summer. It's not just the fact that you have to go out and recruit players to come in and raise the quality. What do you do with the players that you've got? And unless you want a hugely bloated squad, where do you go? And these guys are all on long-term contracts. There's not an easy fix there. You need people to come in and be willing to pay to take them off your hands. Very, very complex situation. So I think whoever comes in will be working with minimum resources. I think there'll be an element of who can get the best out of what you've got. There'll be obviously some money made available, more so I would suspect in the summer than it will be in January. But their hands are effectively tied. Unless you can free up some of the salaries that are going to be on the players who have just come in, you're very limited in terms of what you can do. But this season alone, I think Andy makes a really good point about this summer could have set them back a substantial amount of time. This season, the title winners go straight into a rejigged Champions League format next season that's worth double the amount that's on the offer just now. So if Celtic win the league this season and have access to this rejigged tournament, you're talking a minimum of £60 million. That's before you take in the gates that will come on top of 4 home games. Celtic released tickets for Atletico Madrid's game yesterday. They were sold out within 60 seconds. Sold out. So you're guaranteed 4 home games that are going to sell out regardless of opposition before you talk about TV money.
Yeah.
Those figures are staggering in terms of, for a club who's already sitting just now on the figures that they've just released, to bank that again.
I mean, that is a great point. If you look at the season where Gerrard got the Rangers back into Europe, they had to go to the far reaches of Russia to play UEFA.
4 qualifiers.
4 qualifiers. They were down to 9 men. They somehow get themselves back into the group stage of the Europa League. Tickets went on sale the following week. They were sold out within 24 hours. Now, for the first home game against Betis, there were still tickets available, right up until kick-off at Ibrox, which was unheard of. The 3-game package in that first season was sold out within 24 hours, Peter. So you have an issue there. I have to say, I was surprised the board allowed Michael Beale to limp on. I think certainly after the Celtic defeat, it was effectively, it was a busted flush at that point. But
that becomes really brutal, because he's come in at the tail end of last season, Andy. Now he comes in at the tail end of last season, and then he's already been allowed a transfer window to try and build his own team. Although, even to his credit, for the first time in many a press conference, he said, "Look, it's my team for the last 4 or 5 months, but now I've got the chance to build and get the players I want in." The biggest problem he has with that is, if you sack him after the Celtic game, people are looking, going, "Wait a minute, where are we going here?"
I just think that, for me, I know people say that pre-season games are all about fitness levels, etc. But you go to these games sometimes, and Celtic or Rangers have made 2 or 3 signings, and you get your first look at them, and you think, he's a player. He's going to do something.
Yeah.
I was at the Newcastle game. I was at the Hoffenheim game at Ibrox. There was nothing. There was no indication on either of these evenings at Ibrox that he was going to be a player. He was going to cause not just offences in Scotland a problem.
Yeah.
But, Rangers have an eye in European football. There was nothing there to suggest. Now, you also look, I get that given the players that left, Morelos and Ryan Kent's and Scott Arfields, they had to strengthen the forward areas. I completely understand that. But you still have 3 players in the back 4 who were culpable last season, where Rangers lost a record amount of goals in a group stage of the Champions League.
Yeah.
I found it incredible, Peter, that area of the team wasn't addressed, wasn't looked at. You have 2 fullbacks who, certainly domestically, decent going forward, but haven't, there have been subject question marks over them with regards to defending.
Yeah, okay, let's say he sacks him after the Rangers game, right? We're still at the Rangers-Celtic game. We're still at that point where Rangers have a dilemma. Do you then extract Kevin Muscat and pay for his early exit from Yokohama? Or do you have Philippe Clement, who doesn't cost any money? It doesn't matter whether it's after the Rangers game or now. The problem now is you're 7 points behind, and you're really putting the manager under pressure. But I think the general consensus will be that surely he's going to be in before this next game.
You would like, from a Rangers fan's point of view, I think,
You're still going to pay Kevin Muscat's money.
He will be paid money. I mean, and that was one of the issues as well with regards to Kevin Muscat, because obviously Yokohama, they're going for the title, and I think they were involved in a League Cup or a League semi-final tonight, 2-legged thing. Yeah. My understanding is that Kevin Muscat has given his assurance that I'm ready to go. I will join. So that was one of the kind of stumbling blocks with regards to him. But yeah, they need to get somebody in who, for me, is going to organise the defence. We spoke again, Peter, off the show, and there are parallels to be drawn from when Paul Le Guen was in charge. The dross that arrived at the club during his tenure, his short tenure, in terms of signings, Rangers were able. It clearly wasn't working with Le Guen. Clearly it wasn't working with Michael Beale. David Murray made the change. He was so fortunate to be able to go and pluck Walter Smith from Scotland, bring him back to Ibrox. he signs David Weir, he signs Carlos Coelho, he signs Lee McCulloch, sorts out the spine of the team and makes Rangers difficult to beat. Rangers there isn't a Walter Smith out there just now.
Yeah.
So it's going to take, it needs a strong character to come in there and make some really tough decisions. I admire what Stephen Davis did at the weekend in regards to bringing on Zach Lovelace and giving McCausland a chance. I think he took a wee bit of criticism with regards to the game in Limassol. I thought it was a wee bit unfair. I think that was too, the pitch was extremely hard in Limassol. So Kemar Roof, for example, couldn't have started that game. I think it would have been a lot of pressure on the young lads in a European arena. But fair play to Stephen Davis for bringing these guys on. Such a shame to see young Zach Lovelace picking up an injury. But this is what the new manager is going to have to do. He's going to have to come in here, work with these group of players till he gets through to January. How many players he's going to be able to bring in January, goodness knows. And it's the same in the summer. That's the biggest issue. Rangers are now facing, their fourth rebuild in 4 years?
Yeah.
Effectively. Now, if Michael Beale was able to bring in 11 players, and we're saying only 3 of them are probably worth keeping, maybe Seema, who's only on loan, the new manager has a real, what a mess has been left behind, and he is going to have to, first of all, sort out the defence, make them difficult to beat, and somehow restore confidence. And you do that by winning games of football.
Yeah, and the only problem I have with that, and I think it's the most difficult job, as I mentioned, I think the board is and investment is the biggest job at Rangers in the last, you could go back to 2 or 3 decades. This part here is finding money to give the manager the chance to build a team. Now, it's not just to build a team, it's to build a team facing the financial juggernaut, which is Celtic. And to be fair, and I might be proved wrong here, and I think this is the task facing either a Kevin Muscat or a Philippe Clement. They may well get some money from somewhere, Ali. They may well be able to organise the side and then try and take on the financial might, but they're still facing one of the best coaches in the country. Celtic have the best coach in the country. Not everyone's cup of tea, and we already debated the nature of his departure and the nature of his return, but the facts are he is one of the best coaches in the country.
Yeah, and very experienced too, understands the landscape of the Scottish game and the culture around Glasgow and the culture around Celtic, and I think also he's been able to give himself a very comfortable reintroduction again to Celtic. He's sitting with a 7-point gap just now. As we've spoken about before, you win trophies, all the noise around you present a winning team and all the noise goes away. It really dissipates very, very quickly. I think Celtic will just feel very, very easy in terms of what's happening at Ibrox. They know that they've got the fundamentals there, they've got a strong squad, they've got a settled squad, they've got a very experienced manager. Domestically, they've been dominant across, essentially you could argue, since the turn of the century. You've had aberrations, you've lost titles, but they've been a very dominant force really since Martin O'Neill's time. Across the last decade they've lost 1 title. Their challenge really now is what can they do in a European platform? Are they settled with domestic success, or do they have ambitions to go and do something in the Champions League or European football, which is an entirely different conversation, but certainly in a domestic sense I think you would struggle to see beyond Celtic just now. I think the chasm between the two teams is as wide as it's ever been, and you wouldn't bet against this season ending with another double figures gap between both sides.
Absolutely, and as you say, you touched on it, next season the rewards, the Champions League rewards will take Celtic further and further away, and for me Rangers are needing serious, at this stage, if they're ever hopeful of clawing Celtic back or even getting on a level kind of playing field, serious investment is required at Ibrox.
Yeah.
And it's how you get that. It's like how you get it and how you sustain it. It can't just be a one-off injection that tides you over or gets you through one window. It has to be some longevity with it. And really what you want is a squad that's capable of getting you into Champions League football and bringing in the financial resources that are there.
You're looking for, if the current climate and the current trend is to be considered, you're looking for a Saudi Arabian Rangers fan. And then for the Journos programme, a year from now, we debate the legitimacy of Rangers being owned by a state who basically, as a human rights, we were arguing over the human rights of the owners of the club at that time. But nevertheless, that's the nature of it. whoever the manager is, give us your thoughts on who you think it should be. And of course, the bigger issue that we were talking about there, which is quite simply, what about the investment? Can Rangers truly challenge Celtic? And what sort of money do they need available to do that? And Kevin Muscat, Philippe Clement, remember, someone else could come out of left field that catches all of us. Nobody even knew the name Ange Postecoglou 2 years ago when everybody was wondering whether Eddie Howe was going to arrive or not at Celtic. These things can twist and turn along the way. One thing that we do hope twists and turns, Andy, is quite simply the away allocation for supporters, because good story by Stephen McGowan in the Daily Mail, just talking about the fact that there looks as if there could be a new rule to be voted on. It needs to get an 11-1 majority, so basically one of the old firm, Celtic or Rangers, has to vote in favour of a change to the away allocation. UEFA stipulates 5%. They're maybe talking about 2.5%, but the derby has been ruined.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there was obviously kind of moves from Rangers at the start of the season. It was only 700 tickets that were made on offer for Celtic. Celtic's counter argument was that it couldn't guarantee the safety of the supporters. Subsequently, there'll be no Rangers fans at Celtic Park in December. You're right. There has to be, something in place that we get back to some semblance of normality. I'm not saying. I doubt Peter will ever get back to whatever it was, 5,000, 7,000.
Why not? Because quite simply, it's an old government trick. Threaten this, and we might get this. And then everybody falls into line and goes, "Oh well, we'll just accept it." If you give Celtic or Rangers 1,000 to 2,000 fans at these games, where are you going to put them? It's still the same situation of this area is not ideal for the safety of supporters. Where do you put them? That corner at Ibrox only holds that small area of 700 fans, and that's where the Celtic Football Club have said, no, the fans are getting pelted. And the same goes for Celtic Park with Rangers fans. It's just not a good area. So if you increase it and say, okay, we'll give you 2,000. Well, where do you stick 2,000? With a huge line of security in the Broomloan Road end?
Absolutely. I just don't. I don't think there's an appetite on either side for 7,000 away fans. I think
there is for the fans.
Of course there is, but the people who are calling the shots, Peter, I don't think the appetite's there.
I don't know if that's true. I think clubs would. I think that they're almost pandering to an element within their own support where they don't want to blink first. Where it's almost like, well, we can't be seen to back down. You didn't open your doors to let us in, so we're not doing the same.
But I think history, when we look back on it, when eventually these two boards change and some of the individuals go, I think history will serve notice on them of the pettiness and how they killed this fixture. It will, and regardless of when it was all started through in Edinburgh, it was started in Edinburgh with Leanne Dempster and Hibs and Hearts. When you get to a point when we look back in history and you see this tit-for-tat, stupid nature of these two boards, I think history will be very, very harsh on them, and rightly so, for killing a fixture. Now, it has the poison element, I get that, but it was a fixture that people the world over had quoted as one of those big fixtures that everybody wanted to see, not necessarily for the technically great football, but for the spectacle of it. That's gone at the moment. Whether it comes back or not is another debate on that. And then over and above that, I hear some petty arguments from people going, "Oh, will they do it in Madrid?" Well, who cares? Who cares what they do in Madrid?
Spanish fans don't traditionally travel. It's a different culture, it's two different cities. It's a very, very you can't.
It's a weak argument.
You can't compare the two.
You used the word, Peter. It's become extremely petty, tit for tat, and it has diminished what was a magnificent occasion. The showpiece game in Scottish football, whether you like it or not, it is worldwide viewing, and it has the atmosphere is nowhere near as electric. Speaking to a couple of players on both sides who, they're not going to say publicly, but privately they're saying,
absolutely,
it isn't the same. It just
isn't
the same.
I told you before, I remember interviewing Henrik Larsson to do a thing because he'd played in so many different derbies, and he was saying, well, Celtic and Rangers, it's the one that stands out more because, in Spain, fans don't travel. Manchester, nothing of the same. kind of derby. Even in Holland, he was saying it was incomparable. He said nothing could live with Glasgow and what you experienced. And I think it's a shame that you don't have that. I think it's a huge draw for people, for the game itself, and I think it's hugely diluted without it.
At a time when we are desperately trying to...
Now looking for another sponsor.
No, exactly.
Exactly, that's another programme, isn't it? It's another one for the Journos. The great thing about Scottish football is you never run out of mad topics.
But the thing is, you want to enhance your hand, you know, and by I honestly think that I think there's a fear on the part of some boards that they'll be criticised heavily by their own support by saying, well, you know, if Rangers didn't give Celtic an allocation, why then should we give an allocation? Why should we be the bigger person like that? I think there's a fear of being heavily criticised by your own, and I think what it maybe needed was someone just to be a bit bigger and say, well, we think the game's enhanced by having away fans in.
Yeah, absolutely. Another topic which I think is well worthy of comment is the fact that the UK and Ireland are ready to host Euro 2028. There is a possibility that maybe one or two of the host nations would have a chance to get an automatic entry into that tournament. Although we're getting that, we're getting that good now that we should be thinking, can we win it?
Yeah. For the last 20 years we've been offering to host these tournaments just to try and get in the back door, but no, hopefully we won't need it that time around. But listen, it's I have to say I'm not sold on a co-hosting thing. I like it when it's in one country and one event. I get the UK and Ireland, close proximity. I like it when it's in. That's not going to knock from what's going to be a great occasion for both countries. The COVID one, the Euros, it just didn't have the same feel to it because I don't know. But that's hugely exciting. I would like to think as well, Peter, that there'll be significant investment in Hampden because it will need to be upgraded. There will need to be investment in our national stadium. Well, and for me, that's... Alison was the same. You're fortunate enough to travel around the world and go to some of the most spectacular stadiums. Even the Millennium Stadium, Cardiff, Wembley speaks for itself. Even the Aviva in Dublin, Hampden, for the passion and the backing that the Tartan Army provide, it really is substandard. So I would hope that there would be serious investment to upgrade, whether we can increase capacity. I know there was talks a couple of years ago, kind of sloping, almost kind of the German stadiums like the kind of the Dortmund, the sloping wall. But yeah, I would hope that would be a condition with it, that we could upgrade Hampden and bring it into.
Not going to happen.
No,
I'll tell you why. Just basically because you can only deal, as you know, with the facts, and when you read quotes, and Ian Maxwell's saying there will be some upgrades, but we want to put the majority of any money that's coming our way towards the grassroots football and continue to build our game. And that's another Journos programme for another day. But at the end of the day, if it was me and I thought there was a huge amount of money to transform that stadium to make it intimidating, I'd do away with the track. I'd bring the seats right.
The track's a big problem.
Oh, absolutely. You bring the seats right in. And listen, I absolutely buy into the argument of, if you've got a successful team, Ali, it creates a Hampden roar. We have got a really good team at the moment, but I like the idea of making it an unbelievably, intimidating stadium. Andy's right.
It's slightly modernised.
The slope would be great. I like the German ideal, but I would push it further, right on the track.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree. Whether or not it's going to happen, I think, is an entirely different argument. I think there'll be some painting and decorating that goes on, but I don't think there'll be substantial renovation.
And there speaks Alison, obviously moved into a new house, and the kids have had high expectations of like really good rooms for themselves, and obviously lots of decoration. But she's curtailed it. It's as simple as that, and
the economic reality of life.
And the kids just have to get on with it. And of course, there's no 11-1 vote for the kids in Ali's house, so they're just going to have to live with it. So, do you like the idea of the share of the UK and Ireland?
Yeah, I'm not overly against it. I think
it's only going to be Hampden for us, though.
Yeah,
it won't be any other ground.
Yeah, it's only going. I still think there's an accessibility to it when you're so close that I think would excite people.
Okay. We've talked about so many subjects. There are some of them difficult to debate, and I just felt
Andy
it was...
and I are used to talking about hamstring strains and speaking to agents about who's going where and who's going when. We are not particularly up to speed with Middle Eastern politics.
Absolutely. There's never a programme more than this one that I wish had Jeremy Bowen from the BBC sitting alongside us. Not that I think, and I think it's absolutely pertinent, you know, when you get a situation like this, to debate the point, which is we are not talking about Middle East and the situation, the rights and wrongs we have, and I think you were right to condemn the atrocities of people losing their lives and the terrorist act. But then the debate over legitimacies and land and all of that is not for us to debate. The debate that's strayed into sport is basically to debate whether they've broken a rule by displaying a banner, and if you break the rule you get the fine, and then does the club have to make a point of coming to a decision on, if you consistently break the rules, whether there's a place for you in that club. It's really, really complex, but as ever on the Journos, we try and debate as many of the topics that raise their head, however ugly, on a regular basis. And I thought we'd finish on a kind of on a nice topic, which is I'm watching, and I've watched actually all four of them. I've watched all four of the Beckham on Netflix, the different stages of his career. It's a fantastic watch, Andy, and it got me thinking. I wonder what the top 5 sporting documentaries are that you've absolutely enjoyed. There are 3. I like the Beckham one, but there are 3 that I'm going to highlight to you that I think were absolutely magnificent and are my favourites. The best documentary I've ever seen is The Last Dance. Which is Michael Jordan. It is just a tremendous insight.
It's everybody's COVID, that was everybody's lockdown.
Yeah.
It really is. It's just a tremendous insight into one of the all-time GOATs, no debate, GOAT in Michael Jordan, and the politics that was going on in the background of them trying to win, the major tournament. The other one, of course, is When We Were Kings, the Rumble in the Jungle, which Muhammad Ali, it was just awesome to see the whole build-up to that. And then Maradona.
Yeah. Maradona one was the one I was going to, no holds barred, Maradona.
Yeah. Isn't it great to have, and I think they deserve tremendous credit, isn't it great to have an insight into an individual or a team in such a way? You know, we've got them now, the all or nothing, when you see the team with Mourinho at Tottenham, to a lesser extent Sunderland till I die, and Arteta at Arsenal. But to get an insight into, for example, let's talk about Beckham. Beckham is so good because not only do you get an insight into him as an individual, but you also get a little insight into that show busy part of it, which is his wife. And I thought there was a really human side to Victoria Beckham that maybe people who paint her as this kind of a sultry, sullen-looking girl, I thought it painted her in a really good light. But of course, Beckham himself, I thought at one point, and here's a great debate, I thought he was world class at one point in his life as a footballer.
World class is interesting. He was left out Alex Ferguson's world class list, wasn't he?
Yeah, what's he know?
I've not seen the documentary.
You must watch it.
I've not watched it. I've not had a chance to see it. Was he world class? I think there's an argument you could make for having him there. There was a point in his career, definitely with England, one of the tournament that came after the sending off at 2008 tournament, and also his time at Real Madrid.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I've watched it, Peter. I think it's fantastic, and like you say, I mean, I think it's the most I've ever heard Victoria Spice Girl, whatever. That's the most I've ever heard her speak. Yeah, absolutely. So she kind of came across well. I thought it was well done, and the people who were involved in it, the likes of Sir Alex, and very well put together. I love these things. It's great to get an insight behind the scenes.
It's a wee peek behind the curtain.
I mean, if you're any sports fan, doesn't football, whatever, you just say The Last Dance was another one. Yeah. It's great to get just an insight in how they live, just the day-to-day stuff that we all take for granted.
And the things that we get, as we pride ourselves on, as a journalist, your job is to tell someone something that they don't know. Yeah. So to actually be able to show people the complexities of how it is that you are someone who is driven to become a great footballer, you always want to play for Manchester United, you achieve it, and then suddenly when personal life comes into professional life for Sir Alex, clearly wasn't a fan of Posh Spice.
But again, it shows you how much respect and how David Beckham still talks about Sir Alex. Everybody still refers to him as the boss, and the affection, the great affection he still holds for him. There was obviously, I mean, Sir Alex, goodness me, Govan, west of Scotland. I don't think his world would have collided with the Spice Girls, No. So but I love it, and the fair play to Sir Alex for getting involved and talking about it as well.
It's a really funny story. It's not the Beckham one. I saw a clip of the Roy Keane and Beckham all sitting talking, and it's Beckham talking about nicking over to Dublin to see, because the Spice Girls were in Dublin for 5 or 6 weeks, or touring Ireland for 5 or 6 weeks, and they had a day off, so he nicked back to Dublin one day, never told anyone. Had a night with his now wife, and was at 5:30 in the lounge at Dublin waiting to fly back to Manchester, and who walks in but Sir Alex Ferguson comes on your neck. Maybe he was at the concert as well.
I mean, the other thing about it as well, was he world class?
I think it's difficult, Peter. For a while he was. I mean, see, if you were to speak to players, I mean, as Alison said, we interviewed him a couple of times. But if you speak to people who have played with him, certainly deliveries into the box, and they have him on a pedestal. Roy Keane, speaks very highly. For me, no, I don't. No.
Great debate, isn't it?
It's a great debate. I wouldn't say. I think he was an exceptional football player. I think he brought a lot, especially to as Ali says today, that great Galacticos side of Real Madrid. But he brought so much to United in terms of delivery and big goals, big games. He was a big game player, but I'm not necessarily so sure he was world class.
Yeah. Okay. Great debate, isn't it? Not only we're talking about Beckham. The pressure he was under, that he seemed to be able to handle, on a constant daily basis, of not only being the player, being the focus of attention, wearing the number 7 at Manchester United, then marrying Posh Spice. So you've got two worlds colliding, where you have a certain newspaper industry which craves entertainment stories, and then you have obviously the other our compatriots saying, well, let's write that he can't actually be married to her and perform, but boy, he was able to do it. And then the flip side of that is everybody saying, well, he's been under tremendous pressure, but look at Maradona. Maradona moves to an area where, there's the mafia, there's at Napoli that hasn't won anything, and he's suddenly in there. There's drugs in the melting pot. That documentary was a situation where you're saying, how could he function on a daily basis?
I've always said, Peter, it's a generational thing for me. The great debate, Messi. For me, Maradona's a goal. I mean, I know people will make arguments for Messi and whatever else, but for me, Maradona, you look at the 86 World Cup, you look, as you say, getting into that melting pot in Napoli, the madness, engulfed, surrounded by madness, but able to drag a team to a Serie A title was just, and great clips as well during that. They keep you up in the stadium, shooting, hitting shots into the goalkeeper in the mud pit. He was a phenomenal talent. Yeah,
my favourite of the whole thing, it wasn't necessarily in the documentary, but it did go back to Gary Lineker talking about the fact that he played in a testimonial at Tottenham, and there was obviously a group of people who were playing in the rest of the world team or whatever. And Maradona just kept the ball up going out of the tunnel all the way to the centre spot and scalped it 50 feet in the air 13 times without it deviating maybe left or right. And he said, and all the boys were so impressed, they went out the next exercise to try and do the same. And with the first one, you're chasing it 3 miles over that way. I've just showed you the quality of him. There's a big debate. I'm a big Pelé fan, but Maradona, absolutely great. Welcome to Wrexham. Hollywood movie star is another one.
There's a fantastic Nadia Comaneci documentary on the gymnast. It's fantastic.
Oh, I need to watch that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Again, just the pressures of being identified very, very young as having this fabulous talent. The very first person, of course, to get a perfect 10, and the pressure around about it, and how debilitating that is to cope with, and the mental effect it has on you as a young adult. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the ultimate one, which I know you'll share with me on, which is, for me, The Last Dance is the best one, closely followed by When We Were Kings. And the ultimate for me, if we're talking about heroes and journalistic heroes, mine was Hugh McIlvanney. And to sit down with him for an hour and just basically chat to the man, the great man, about his life and career. And he knew when I was sitting, he was waiting for me to ask him about Ali, because that was to be honest with you, the football was was a side issue for me, because for Hugh McIlvanney, a Scot, to be part of that inner sanctum of a few journalists. I think one of them was from the Mirror, and for those journalists, one of them might be from the Sun as well, actually, Andy, where they were in the inner sanctum, where people were looking in his camp and saying, George Foreman knocks people out in the first round, he's hammering everybody, and there was a genuine fear, and I remember it as a boy, there was a genuine fear that Ali was in serious danger at 32 of being absolutely in trouble with George Foreman, you know, to the point where people were fearing for his life because he was so formidable. But to get that insight, not only from McIlvanney, but also the documentary, where basically he's so assured, and then he berates his team to say, I need you to be on side because I'm going to beat this guy. It was great.
Yeah, I could have saved you the trip. I met Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Met him in LA maybe 20 years ago now, where they filmed Pretty Woman, Beverly Wilshire. A couple of us had popped in for a light afternoon ale and hear the lift doors open and two massive bouncers come out, and behind them Muhammad Ali, and there's a picture floating about somewhere.
Did you get to shake his hand?
We did, and the speech had gone, and he was, you know, communicated kind of nodding, and so he allowed us to get a picture with him, which I've got in the house somewhere. And then about 4 hours later, we're sitting in a pub in Santa Monica, and in walked Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
Star watching.
Exactly.
I think before we go, it's very pertinent of me to highlight the fact that Andy comes from Motherwell and completely and utterly distanced himself from the socialist values. Most of the guys that we all hung about with, may I say, we went to Burnt Island and Ayr on our holidays. Andy, Beverly, Wiltshire. Do you know what I mean?
I bet he was in a trip.
Yeah. And he was sitting there in a car with somebody who says, I've never worked a stick shift before. Can you show me how to do it? Brilliant. That is a fantastic story. Yeah, and you never just dine out on that.
You're right, though. Can you imagine after one of the biggest sporting events in history, someone saying, do you want to come back to the house?
And you come
back and have a drink, and we'll sit and I'll give you chapter and verse.
And he went back to, I think it was the log cabin that Ali had, and Hugh McIlvanney just talks about it. So it's on our site, and it's, you know, it's, for me, it's one of my favourite interviews of all time. I was going to ask someone out with the sports and the people. Have I missed any documentary before we go? Is there anyone that you think? Beckham, the Sir Alex Ferguson, never give in.
Ferguson one.
But
it's a good Ronaldo one. The first Ronaldo.
Yeah, the Brazilian, and of course there's another one, Hoop Dreams, which is the story of young people trying to, you know, make it in to the NBA. There's so many of them. You can give us your thoughts as well on that. It's been an absolute joy. Difficult subjects on the Journos today. I thought Andy, who wasn't too enthusiastic when he sat down in the chair, because it's such a hot topic. But one that, will it be resolved? Will it be an ongoing situation where people's right to display banners and voice their opinion on any political issue or other issues within a football ground or in any sporting occasion? Certainly open to debate. We'll wait to see who Rangers eventually appoint as the manager. We'd love to see more fans at football, and of course documentaries. We absolutely love them. That's the topics for today's Journos. Thanks to Andy Devlin, thanks to Alison McConnell, from myself, Peter Martin. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can see previous Journos programmes. We've got one-to-ones with more than a few football stars and people from entertainment and politics coming up in the forthcoming weeks that I know you'll enjoy, as well as the football show. Neil Lennon and Lee McCulloch, regular guests on our programme now. So, with that in mind, thank you very much for listening to the podcast and, of course, watching PLZ Soccer on YouTube. We'll see you again.